So guys, yesterday Chris Eubank Jr. Made some comments, that he feels he can beat Canelo. And a lot of people, especially British fans, who feel that Chris Eubank is deluded, Chris Eubank talks a lot of rubbish, they jumped on it. They jumped on it and they started ripping him, and the fact that he said, Canelo would knock Billy Joe. Now, everybody knows that I think Canelo knocks Billy Joe out. I've said to you guys my opinions. I don't want to go, but this video is about Chris Eubank and him saying that he feels he can beat Canelo. Him and his dad, early on in his career, they felt their style in terms of being able to, with his fast hands, box and move and just absolutely obliterate guys. Because Eubank looked like an absolute force. I remember after we lost to Saunders, where, he gave up the first 6 rounds and actually came back well in that fight. I think that fight, although Eubank lost, I think they felt that Eubank just gave up the first 6 rounds, him and his team, his dad, and they felt in a rematch they would absolutely obliterate Saunders. But the problem was still there. The problem was that Chris Eubank didn't have great feet. Although he had fast hands, someone could easily control him with a jab, keep him at distance, and Eubank at times would look like amateurish at times. Although, like I said, I think Eubank has some great attributes. He has a great chin. He has very fast hands. He's very fit. He's got a great engine. Machine, Eubank is. And, you see him, he lives the life. He lives in the gym. You never see him out of shape. He lives the life of an athlete, and you got to give him that. But, his feet were very poor, and he was easily controlled by the jab and outboxed. And the Groves fight didn't do great for his reputation, because in that fight, I felt he was thoroughly outboxed. Even though at times he came on in that fight, especially towards the end, but Groves got injured, his shoulder popped out. Eubank, for me, got outboxed in that fight. And I think that really damaged his reputation, getting beat to George Groves, to be honest with you. Because I think a lot of people started thinking this guy's just all talk. Eubank had some good wins in between. He beat Arthur Abraham up. Although Arthur Abraham was a shell of himself, he beat DeGale, also another guy that was shell of himself. That was after Groves. And then he beat Korobov in a fight where, Korobov got injured. So, which would have been a very intriguing fight, because Korobov was another guy like Billy Joe Saunders that can box and move, and he would have made it difficult. And the first round he lost. And I know a lot of people say, he was losing that fight. Only went 1 round. You can't judge a fight on 1 round and say, he was losing that fight. Come on. I just think there's too many people out there that hate on Chris Eubank Jr. and not willing to give him any credit for what he's done and the attributes that he does have. Listen, I'm not saying Eubank Jr. is a world beater. I'm not saying he's a world beater. But I certainly don't think he has any chance against Canelo. But I do think in the right fight. See, a lot of people say Eubank will never be a world champion. You see, that's casual talk for me. That's casual talk, because for me, Eubank definitely has the capacity of becoming a world champion. He definitely has the capacity if against the right opponent. You see, if Chris Eubank had fought, Billy Joe fought for the world title in Andy Lee and Shifat Asufi, Chris Eubank would be a world champion. He definitely would beat Shifat Asufi, and I would pick him against Andy Lee as well. That version of Andy Lee that fought Saunders, I would definitely pick Eubank. I feel like a lot of people think Chris Eubank is delusional. And listen, at times he does come out with some stuff that, we question. But at the end of the day, he is a good fighter. I don't think people understand that, yes, some styles may be a problem for Chris Eubank, but there are certain styles where he can win against world-class fighters. Arthur Abraham was a world-class fighter. Don't get me wrong, he was past his best. DeGale was past his best. But Eubank against the right style, like for example, George Groves beat Chudinov, right, for the world title. Eubank would beat Chudinov for the world title. Eubank would have beaten Chudinov as well. You see, this is what I'm trying to say. Matchmaking is very important in this business. And how his team hasn't managed to get him or make him a world champion with some of the world champions I just mentioned that were around at 168. Like, we're talking about Shifat Asufi. I know he was for a vacant title. He wasn't a world champion. But, like, Andy Lee. Then you look at Chudinov. Right? You look at some of these names that were world champions in around 160 and 168, and you think that a lot of people give Eubank a lot of stick about not being world champion and he'll never be world champion. But when you hear some of these names, you think that if Eubank had faced these guys for the world title, he would be a world champion. He'd be a legitimate world champion. So it's obviously his team has not steered him in the direction of a world title fight where he would win. Like Chudinov, like George Groves got that fight, right? Do you honestly think Chris Eubank wouldn't have beaten Chudinov if he had fought him for a world title? Of course he would have. Of course he would have. But this is what I'm trying to say, that Chudinov was the perfect fight for someone like Chris Eubank Jr. Perfect fight. He stands there, likes to have a tear up. Eubank would have, in my opinion, knocked him out quicker than Groves, because his style was perfect for Eubank. Plus, Eubank has a great chin. That's the advantage. So anyone that stands and trades with him, he's going to do well. See, Canelo doesn't stand and trade. Canelo's a very good boxer. That's why Canelo would beat him, because even though Eubank has a good chin, Canelo, for me, is too smart a boxer. If George Groves was able to control and do that to Eubank, then Canelo would do the same, and more emphatically. And Canelo's not as vulnerable as George Groves. I personally think that Murata is a fight right now, of all the champions that I see, and Eubank is the interim WBA world champ. I don't know why that fight's not being made. I don't know why Eubank doesn't chase Murata. I know they've talked about it, but surely, hopefully, Kalasala, now that he's the promoter of Eubank, they can navigate Chris Eubank to a world title, because there are guys out there that he can beat. And Murata is... See, the champions at middleweight are Andrade, who I believe would be a nightmare for Eubank. There's Charlo, who would be a very tough fight as well. One that Eubank would probably be underdog. And Golovkin, who right now, I would say, is a fight that Eubank should target as well. But out of those four, right, for me, Murata's the weak link out of those four. And by the way, Murata's a good fighter as well. I'm not saying Murata's a very good fighter. And Murata's capable of beating Eubank. However, I feel I would favour Eubank in that fight. So I don't know why his team should be pushing, especially the fact that I'm pretty certain he's interim WBA world champion. So you know how Murata's a super champion, WBA super champion. I think Chris Eubank is the interim champion. So I don't know why. I think they should be pushing after the Marcus Morrison fight. I know they're talking about Brook. See, I think a lot of Chris Eubank's fights have been like that. De Gale, like Barry Hearn said this a while back, that what does that fight mean? What does that mean for his career? And I remember 2 years ago, he said now's the time for him to fight Golovkin. I think he should fight Golovkin. Because the De Gale fight, okay, yeah, it does good for your profile. It's a big fight. And Brook would be the same. It'd be a biggish fight. But Brook's not really a middleweight. What does that do for his career if he beats Brook? People are going to say, oh, he beat a washed Brook. And Brook's not a middleweight. So I don't understand that, why they're even talking about that fight. You're having your tune-up. Like, if you wanted to fight Brook, fight him next. Fight him next. Don't fight Brook after Morrison. The next fight after Morrison should be for a world title. Should be someone like Golovkin or Murata. Someone where, Chris Eubank will be raising his stock in world boxing by becoming a world champ. And for me, out of the four champions at middleweight, Murata's definitely the fight that Eubank, especially the fact that he's interim champion of the WBA interim champion, and Murata's the super WBA champion. It surely makes a lot of sense. And Murata may even come to the UK for that fight. Or maybe Chris Eubank doesn't mind traveling. Maybe he'd go and fight Murata in his backyard, But I feel like Chris Eubank next step needs to be for a world title. Him talking about Canelo and all this stuff, it's like, all right, we just need, if he becomes a world champion, legitimate world champion, which he's capable of. I keep saying that. A lot of people sometimes their hate of an individual gets in the way of their judgment, and it clouds their judgment, right? Eubank is more than capable against the right opponent of beating a world champion. No doubt about it. Like I said, Murata, for me, he can beat him. Styles make fights in this business, and there's certain styles that are a problem for Chris Eubank Jr. Now, it's only time will tell how much him working with Roy Jones, how much he's improved, how better he can get. So when he comes up against a Billy Joe or Andrade, a slick guy, a guy that likes to box and move, how he does, only time will tell. Now, Canelo is a fight that I would not recommend at all yet, because for me, I don't think he has a chance in that fight. I feel like he needs to first become a world champion. And he's not become a world champion. See, everyone's goal in boxing is to become a world champion. Chris Eubank hasn't been a legitimate world champion, even though he should have been by now. Because he definitely has the ability, in my opinion, to become a world champion. I know Billy Joe Saunders said, oh, he'll never become a world champion. In my opinion, if Eubank had fought the guys that Billy Joe fought for world titles, he would be a world champion. Right? Chris Eubank against the right fighter, like a Murata, he can become world champion. But it's about his team moving him in the right direction. And for me, a lot of the moves that he's made have been not the right moves. And I think that's why he's suffering. And that's why he's not been, he's fought for the IBO. But we all know the IBO is not a legitimate world title. The IBO is, for me, the IBO is a world championship. But do any of the other organization bodies recognize that as a unification fight? So if you fight for the IBO, if you hold the IBO, would the WBA recognize that as a unification fight? For example, if there's a mandatory for a WBA guy to fight one of their mandatories, right? Would they classify an IBO as a unification fight? They wouldn't. They wouldn't, because the IBO is not classified as a legitimate organization, world championship. So for me, WBA, WBC, IBF, and WBO, you need to hold one of them. And Eubank could have easily held one of those titles. But unfortunately, I don't know what they've been going down their own route, going down their own way. And like I said, right now, after Marcus Morrison, hopefully Chris Eubank can pursue the Murata route and look to win that title. Because like I said, Chris Eubank would fight Murata anywhere. It's not like he would have a trouble. He went and fought Yildirim. I know Yildirim's not a top level guy, but nevertheless, he went into a hostile territory. And I think Eubank's a proper fighter. I don't think he would be afraid to go to anybody's territory. But right now, when he's talking about Canelo, a lot of people think that Eubank is just talking. And they start giving him a lot of stick because they don't feel like he's fought anyone or beat anyone, never become a world champion. But I keep saying Eubank is more than capable of becoming world champion against the right opponent. And for me, after Marcus Morrison, he should definitely target the Murata fight. And if he beats Murata, he becomes a world champion, a legitimate world champion in people's eyes. And then he can push on, get the unification fights, go up, and then he can call for a Canelo. He can call for a Golovkin. He can get these big fights. But first, you need to, in my opinion, become a legitimate world champion. And Murata's there for him. Murata is there for a fight. He's the interim champion. I'm pretty sure that fight could be made quite comfortably. Especially, that would be a big fight. That would be a big fight. It'd be a big money fight for Murata. Surely Murata would come to the UK for that fight if he gets paid well. Or maybe Eubank can go to his backyard in Japan. I believe he fights in Japan. Murata from Japan, I believe. So yeah. So listen, man. I feel like Eubank gets a lot of unnecessary stick, and I think he's a lot better than what people give him credit for. I'm not saying he's elite. I'm saying he's world class. Against the certain styles, he can win a world championship without question. He can win a world. You honestly think, right? Chudinov, Andy Lee, Shifat Asufi, Murata, other champions. Like, do you honestly think that he would have no chance against these guys? I would pick him against all, by the way. So there are guys out there that he can beat at world level and become a world champion. But it's just about being steered in the right direction. And unfortunately, I don't think he has been steered in the right direction. See, a lot of fighters today, what they do is they look to steer, especially when you got a name like Eubank. Eubank's got a profile already because of his father is, son of a great fighter. Many fighters don't have that profile. They don't have that, profile that Chris Eubank had. Chris Eubank, he's never been a world champion, and he's already a millionaire. He's already made a lot of money. Why? Because, he's got that platform because of his father. But they need to use that platform to get him a legitimate world title shot, because since the Groves fight, he hasn't had a world title shot. He fought guys like De Gale, he's fought Korobov, and now he's fighting Marcus Morrison. Then after that, it needs to be a world title shot. It needs to be a guy like Murata or a Golovkin. I would personally prefer him to fight Murata just so he can become a world. I feel like that would be a great chance for him to become. And by no means am I dismissing Murata, because Murata's a good fighter. And that's not an easy fight for Chris Eubank. But I feel like that's his best chance out of the 4 that in the middleweight division for him becoming a world champion. Then he can jump into a unification fight, in a risky fight with one of them if he beats Murata. That, and someone like Golovkin, then if he becomes world champion, maybe Golovkin be looking to unify with Chris Eubank. That would make for a mouth-watering clash, and it would be a big fight here in the UK. And Golovkin right now is all about, for me, who pays him the most, and for me that fight would be huge. So I think Chris Eubank should definitely look at Murata after Marcus Morrison. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think that Chris Eubank can beat Canelo? I don't think Chris Eubank can beat Canelo. I think that would be a horrible style. I think Canelo's very good boxer. He hits hard. I know some people say he doesn't hit hard. He hits hard. He's very accurate. He's improved with his feet. And he would be a problem for Chris Eubank. So that's definitely not a fight that I think he should be looking at, unless like he accomplishes everything at middleweight, becomes a world champion, maybe looks to unify, and then maybe he can look to fight someone like Canelo. Because right now Canelo's got his last few fights, and I don't think a fight with Chris Eubank is on anyone's hit list. I think people want him to fight Beterbiev, they want him to fight Andrade or Charlo, but right now Chris Eubank's not really getting himself out there. If Chris Eubank can go and fight a Murata, beat him, then fight someone like Charlo and Andrade and beat one of them, then we're talking. Now we're talking of a guy that deserves a Canelo shot. But as of right now, I don't think his skill set, always shown anything that his skill set could give Canelo any trouble. And is he really deserving of that fight as of right now? Probably not. But leave your thoughts. Let me know what you think, guys. And guys, remember to... And people, by the way, people will say, oh, well, Yildirim wasn't deserving. He's more deserving than Yildirim. Yeah, he is. But Yildirim was his mandatory. Canelo had no choice but to fight him. Do I think that fight was right? No. But the fact is, he was his mandatory. That was Canelo's mandatory. But I don't think... I think if we look at the guys that in the 168 and 160 pound division, who, out of all the champions that are there, would you say Eubank's more deserving than any of them? No. So if Eubank can become a world champion and maybe look to unify at middleweight, then 100% I feel like he should be getting that Canelo fight. But as of right now, I don't think he's on anybody's thoughts about getting the Canelo fight. I don't think anybody really would, especially in America, nobody would care about Eubank Canelo. So yeah, leave your thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. What do you make of Eubank's comments? Do you think he can become a world champion? Leave your thoughts. Let me know what you think. And guys, remember to please like, share, subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.